come back to the enterprise that is at issue here, that because the mind, when we say vastness or eternal, it always as if it's an extension of time. We see this difficulty in the Bible as well. In the beginning was the Word, as if there is a zero time axis, that's where it began. No, this is where the difficulty comes. I give you my own personal account of this. One example, the Royal Society of Canada had organized a whole symposium on the origin and evolution of the universe. And they invited about a dozen people, 4 from UK, 4 from Canada, from USA. And I presented a paper there, which the title was, "In the Beginning is the Dance of Love." Twice, the proofreader, without even asking me, changed this. "In the beginning was the dance of love." You see the difficulty? Because for them, it's a time axis which has a zero starting point. But more importantly, when we speak about Brahma as eternal, eternity is not endless time. It is free of time, not against time. In fact, a very good way to look at this is it's perpendicular to time. Therefore, it leaves no sine or cosine, no projection on time. But it can intersect with time at any time. Awareness of eternity or timelessness is not a function of time at all. It is actually a function of the quality of being. So, for example, when the Buddha was enlightened, these are the phrases used in the Buddhist tradition. He became Nirakal, but also Trikaladarshi. He became beyond time or timeless, but also aware of the 3 times, meaning past, present, and future. So, to be free of time doesn't mean to be against time, but it is not bound by time. Therefore, it is not bound by thought, not bound by mind, because thought cannot proceed without time. Also space, etc., but time becomes the more important thing. St. Augustine has a very lovely description. He says, as long as nobody asks me what time is, I'm very clear what it is. But the moment they ask, I don't know. This is St. Augustine, writing many centuries ago. So, Brahma is really essentially to say that no thought-oriented description, whether it is in terms of space or time, being or non-being, first or last, none of this can actually capture this. Therefore, the repeated emphasis in the Upanishads, neti neti, which can mean not this, or not yet, not yet. Literally, it actually comes from na iti. This is not the end. Because in Sanskrit, or even actually even in the Yoga Sutras, at the end of a chapter, or especially at the end of the book, one says iti. So he's saying na iti, neti. So therefore, we can't really say anything about it. And in general, in Sanskrit, it is always the pronoun that is used with Brahma is it, not he or she. And basically the rationale for that is, in our usual language, we say something is neuter because it is not yet developed enough to have a gender. There the idea is, it is not degenerated enough to have a gender. It is it is beyond genderification, or if you like, prior to gender, but prior, neuter can be prior to genderification as well, but it's a different understanding behind this. And therefore, really, strictly speaking, nothing can be said about it. But I would tell you one thing, which I'm always rather amused by. Practically all the sages come to saying, well, really, nothing can be said about it. Then they say something about it. So in the Upanishads, it gradually became a way of saying at least three things. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Which is to say truth. By the way, in Sanskrit, there is only one word for both truth and reality. So, Sat. And Chit, that it is conscious, it is not dead. It's a good reminder, because as I have earlier already said, in the scientific assumption, primary reality is matter without any consciousness. Complete. No, here one is saying the other way around. And Anand, bliss, delight, happiness, various phrases can be used to translate this. Translation is always a bit of a problem, because English language, without question, is very much influenced by the whole biblical tradition. And therefore, one has to keep using many words to say, it is this, but not neti neti. And not quite this. No, but it's the same thing here. Sanskrit, Hindi is very much influenced by the Indian tradition. It could hardly be otherwise. So, therefore, if one wishes to say anything about the manifested universe, one already then comes a level below. About Brahma, really nothing can actually be said. Now, but there is one or two very important things here. And the fundamental difference in the entire Abrahamic tradition, by which, as I have already said, what we mean by Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the whole of the Indian tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, this is the root of the fundamental divergence. In the biblical tradition, God created the world, and no creature can be at the same level as the Creator. Even the highest angel, whose name is Lucifer, literally means the light bearer, which is why he's called Lucifer. Even the highest angel was expelled from heaven because, I'm quoting Prophet Isaiah, because he wished to be like the Most High. And anybody in the Abrahamic tradition who ever came close to saying this, Christ is a very good example. Al-Hallaj is a very good example. Rumi is a very good example. They were always in trouble with their protectors of their religions. In the Indian tradition, strictly speaking, there is no creation myth. These days people would say, oh, there are creation myths, because we are taking the word creation coming from English and we keep putting the same kind of ideas onto this. But there are, strictly speaking, there is an emanation myth. Brahma did not create the world, Brahma became the world. Brahma is not only in everything, Brahma is everything. Sarvam idam Brahma. All this is Brahma. This is Chandogya Upanishad that I just quoted. So, one needs to be very clear that there is a fundamental difference here. Even a mosquito is Brahma. And then the suggestion is that Brahma is manifesting at different levels of consciousness, and therefore correspondingly different levels of materiality. But in a manner of speaking, one might almost say that even the hardest piece of matter is really congealed consciousness. which is why from the perspective of the Indian tradition, every tree has a deva responsible for this, every river has a deva responsible for this, etc. So, actually let me here just expand this a little bit because it has many implications. The oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, takes the following analogy. Just as the spider web oozes out of the substance of the spider, so the whole manifested universe has oozed out of the substance of Brahma. Then the spider can move anywhere on the web as well as away from the web. Therefore, Brahma is both immanent, but it can also be transcendent. This is a major problem in the Abrahamic tradition. Is God wholly transcendent? Then how could he ever take any interest in what's going on here? Or is God wholly immanent? Then that leads to difficulty. In the Christian tradition, it was remarkably well settled actually by having a trinity. The Holy Spirit is wholly immanent, God is wholly transcendent, and Christ is the connecting link. Lovely solution of a theological problem. But the idea of the Trinity doesn't actually appear in the Bible, but it's a theological contribution to solve this problem. And many people, actually great people in the Christian tradition, did not accept the idea of the Trinity. Some of you may know, Newton, for example, totally rejected this idea. And he, on the other hand, they wanted to make him the master of the Trinity College. Then the emperor had to give him a special dispensation that in spite of his belief, he could become the master of the Trinity College. You people should know all of these. These are great thoughts, great people in the history of the world, great scientists, and people often forget. Newton wrote more words in theology and alchemy than in physics and mathematics. These are great minds. They know many things. Maybe you'll have to read my article on Newton. And Science and the Sacred, actually, here, published in India. Okay, well, we return to more in the manifested world then everything is Brahma, but in general we are not aware of this. So therefore the spiritual enterprise from the Indian point of view becomes to discover and to relate with what is my deepest. We would use, in India, the general tendency is to use the expression deepest self rather than the highest self. In the biblical tradition, one would use the word highest. There is a general tendency that God is above us. In the India, general tendency is that God is within us. So one has to don't get occupied with one terminology or the other. Geometry is not what is going to confuse us here. So I often use the phrase subtler levels. Language gets fixed in any tradition, then one gets too attached to it. I keep reminding you, it's always a good idea to see how others put it differently. And so, but the notion that if I can discover what I truly am, and the implication is, or the suggestion from the sages is, like Raman Maharishi would have no doubt saying this, that deep down one is Brahma. But these are just nice invitations. Don't therefore fantasize that that's where we live. Because what that requires is a complete prati prasava, a complete counterflow of mind to move deeper and deeper inside. Which is also the reason you can see how these things culturally manifest very much. You would almost never see an image of the Buddha or Mahavira or any of the great sages in India in the posture of a prayer. They would always have the posture of meditation. On the other hand, you look at any of the great sages in the Abrahamic world, Christ himself, Moses, anybody, they always have postures of prayer. You see, culture is very much influenced by these things. Our language is influenced by this, our rituals are influenced by this, even our architecture, painting, sculpture, everything is influenced by these ideas. We forget how deeply conditioned we are. Everybody is. Now, we don't need to feel bad about it, but we need to realize that when it is said that we need to be free of this conditioning, this is a very large enterprise. Very large enterprise. Mm-hmm.